1260. How many know that there was a time period when pagan Rome ruled the world supremely? For how long? Okay, but you know it. For 360 years. Okay. Remember, we've read here already that Sister White says that Uriah Smith's book, Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation, it is what? God's helping hand. If you go to Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, and you look at his comments on Daniel 11, verse 24, go to Daniel 11, verse 24. He will tell you that verse 24 of Daniel 11 is speaking about pagan Rome, and that pagan Rome was going to rule the world for a time, based upon the last phrase in verse 24. It says, he shall forecast, he being pagan Rome, pagan Rome shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. What is a time in Bible prophecy? What's a year? 360 years. Pagan Rome was going to be invincible for 360 years. Okay, now go to Daniel 8:9. In Daniel 8:9, this little horn here that's introduced into the scenario, in verse 9 is talking about pagan Rome. It says, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. When pagan Rome comes into history, it has to conquer three geographical areas. The east, the south, the pleasant land. The east is Syria. The pleasant land is Israel. And the south is Egypt. In those three obstacles for pagan Rome, you can also see these three obstacles in Daniel 11, verses 16 and 17. Okay? But what was the third of those three obstacles that pagan Rome conquered? It was Egypt. Pagan Rome conquered Egypt at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. It's one of the most significant naval battles of ancient history, the Battle of Actium. And from that point on, pagan Rome ruled the world supremely until the year 330, when Constantine divided the empire into east and west by moving the capital from the city of Rome to the city of Constantinople. What I'm saying is that Daniel 11:24, and this is pioneer understanding that you can find in Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation, God's Helping Hand by Uriah Smith, that pagan Rome ruled the world supremely for 360 years, but it only did so after it conquered three geographical areas, Syria, Israel, and Egypt. This is the same with papal Rome. Papal Rome had to conquer three geographical areas that were three horns. Okay, the Durali, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. The last of those horns were the Goths that were driven from the city of Rome in the year 538, and then the papacy ruled supremely for 1260 years until 1798. The point is this. In order for pagan Rome to rule the world supremely, it first had to overcome three geographical obstacles. In order for papal Rome to rule the world supremely, it had to overcome three geographical obstacles. In order for modern Rome to rule the world supremely, it has to overcome what? Three what? Geographical obstacles. If you're identifying verse 41 as a church, you just broke the pattern. The king of the south, Soviet Union, geographical power. The glorious land, the United States, geographical power. Egypt, the countries of the world, geographical power. Okay, you follow the problem there? And by the way, upon the testimony of two, a thing is established. It's established that whoever the king of the south, the glorious land, and Egypt are, they have to be geographical powers. Page 10. We read this last night, page 10, page 30 of the notes, okay? Page 30 of the notes. We read this, we referred to this quote last night. In the Revelation, all the books of the Bible meet and end. Here is the complement of the book of Daniel. Revelation is the complement of the book of Daniel. And in your notes, the word complement is defined by Webster. What's the definition that's in your notes from last night? To complement means to bring to perfection. The book of Daniel is brought to perfection by the book of Revelation. And in the notes from last night, if you weren't here, you'll find 3 other quotes about Daniel and Revelation from the Spirit of Prophecy. She says the same line of prophecy is taken up in Revelation that's taken up in the book of Daniel. Another quote says the same subjects are taught in Revelation that are taught in the book of Daniel. And I forget what the other one says. Okay, but similar thought. The books in the other one says that Daniel and Revelation are the same book. So, if verse 41 of Daniel 11 isn't the United States, then where do we find the United States in the book of Daniel? Because we need to see the United States in the book of Daniel, because everyone agrees that the earth beast of Revelation 13 verse 11 is the United States. And if the book of Revelation is taking up the same line of prophecy as the book of Daniel, and the book of Revelation is identifying the United States, then where is it that the United States is in the book of Daniel if it's not Daniel 11 verse 41? You follow the logic? No? Did I lose you there? Yes? No? Okay, anyway. That logic sounds too. Okay, the divine pattern we looked at last night. Or this morning. This morning. It's all blending into one now. Okay. In Daniel 11:40 to 45, it begins in 1798. It describes the healing of the deadly wound. And then verse 44, you see the message of the hour, the tidings out of the east and the north. The close of probation and the plagues are in Daniel 12:1, which leads to the second coming of Christ. Okay, Revelation 13, it's the same structure. It begins in 1798. Do you remember the quote? It's in your notes. At the time when the papacy was robbed of its strength, John beheld a new power coming up out of the earth. That's 1798. Revelation 13 begins in 1798. It tells the story of the healing of the deadly wound. And that brings you to chapter 14, which is the message of the hour. They're the same structure. Revelation 17 begins in 1798 because John was carried away to the wilderness. Remember that study? And Revelation 17 is telling how the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet come together at the end of the world into the final kingdom. That's the healing of the deadly wound, and it leads into Revelation 18, which is the message of the hour. So the structure of Revelation 17 and the structure of Revelation 13 and the structure of Daniel 11:40 to 45 is the identical structure. Daniel 11 is telling that story from the perspective of the king of the north, the papacy. Revelation 13 is telling the story from the perspective of the false prophet, the United States. Revelation 17 is telling the story from the perspective of the dragon, the 10 kings, the United Nations. The divine sequence, we haven't looked at this directly yet, but Egypt is the world. First, the United States is conquered in verse 41. Sunday law, and then in verse 42, the papacy conquers the world. And that sequence of first the United States and then the world is the sequence of Bible prophecy. Notice what Sister White says in Testimonies, Volume 6, page 18. As America, the land of religious liberty, the glorious land, shall unite with the papacy in forcing the conscience and compelling men to honor the false Sabbath, the people of every country on the globe will be led to follow her example. Who receives the Sunday law first? America. Then every country on the globe follows her example. Second witness, foreign nations will follow the example of the United States. Though she leads out, yet the same crisis will come upon our people in all parts of the world. First the United States, then the world. This is the sequence of the Sunday law. This is the sequence identified in Daniel 11:40 to 45. We've dealt with the Alpha and Omega earlier. That's where we started here, okay, on number 13. But drop down to, on page 31, the daily. Okay, one of the arguments is that in the 19 teens, okay, 1910, 1911, 1912, 1913, Sister White was telling those people in that history to quit arguing about the daily. So the passages where Sister White tells them to quit arguing about the daily are often used here at the end of the world to say that we're not supposed to be speaking about the daily. Of course, those people that believe that the daily is Christ's sanctuary ministry, they speak about that whenever and wherever they want. But those of us that are identifying the daily as the paganism, we're confronted with these testimonies that we're not supposed to speak about the daily. But our argument has been from the very start this. The daily in the early part of the 20th century was not present truth. The daily becomes present truth when the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 begin to be fulfilled. And this next quote will explain that. Okay? This next quote, if you open to Daniel 11 so that we can do this quote. She quotes from Daniel 11. We'll read it. We'll read the verses she's speaking of. So open to Daniel 11, verse 30. Under the word daily, the quote says, I'm going to read from your notes now. It says, "We have no time to lose." Are you with me? "Troublous times are before us. The world is stirred with the spirit of war. Soon the scenes of trouble spoken of in the prophecies will take place. The prophecy in Revelation 13 has nearly reached its complete fulfillment." Is that what it says? Okay, well, don't let me get away with that if that isn't what it says. What does it say? The prophecy in the 11th of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. So what prophecy is she speaking about? Yeah, but what prophecy? See, now you may not remember it, or you may not have thought it through, but we started here this morning with reading from Great Controversy 356. It's in your notes. And in Great Controversy 356, she says the time of the end is 1798. Right? Sister White says the time of the end is 1798. Great Controversy 356. Correct? And verse 40 says, "and at the time of the end." So when does verse 40 begin according to Sister White? 1798. But she's talking about the fulfillment of Daniel 11. So she's not talking about verses 1 through 39, is she? She can't be. Because she knows the time of the end is 1798. When she's talking about the prophecy in the 11th chapter of Daniel being nearly fulfilled, she knows it's the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 because she knows 1798 is the time of the end. She knows the first 39 verses of Daniel have been fulfilled before verse 40, and verse 40 starts at the time of the end in 1798. So the prophecy in the 11th chapter of Daniel that she's speaking about is the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. You follow the logic? Yes? Okay. The prophecy in the 11th of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Much of the history that's taken place in the fulfillment of this prophecy will be repeated. What is she speaking about? Much of the history that's taken place in the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 11 will be repeated. And this is true. If you take Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith and you go through his commentary on Daniel 11, you'll see that the histories that are represented in the first 39 verses of Daniel 11, they get repeated in the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. So she's giving us a key as students of prophecy. If you want to understand the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, because that's what she's speaking about. If you want to understand them, then you need to understand that one of the principles that will help you to understand it is that there's histories in Daniel 11 that will be repeated in the last 6 verses. You follow that? She says much of the history that's taken place in fulfillment of this prophecy will be repeated. Is she inspired? Yes. So they will be repeated, will they not? Then she really isolates it for us. She says, in the 30th verse, a power is spoken of that shall be grieved. And then she quotes verses 30 to 36. And as soon as she finishes verse 36, she says this: scenes similar to those described in these words will take place. So here's what she's saying. She points us to the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. She says the rule of thumb to pay attention to is that there's histories in Daniel 11 that are repeated in the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. And then she says, by the way, what you really need to understand is that the scenes represented in verses 30 to 36, they will be repeated in the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. Notice, she says, in the 30th verse, a power is spoken of. Let's go to the 30th verse. And she says, that shall be grieved. Verse 30 says, for the ships of Kittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved. And here's where she starts quoting. And return and have indignation against the holy covenant, so shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with